Well, joining me now from Medford, Massachusetts is Yoon-Lee. He's a professor of Korean studies at Tufts University. Peipei Qiu is in New York. She's a professor of Chinese and Japanese at Vassar College and the author of the book Chinese Comfort Women. And in Singapore, we have Lim Tai Wey. He's an adjunct research fellow at the National University of Singapore's East Asian Institute. I thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers. We don't have too much time. We have about 13 minutes, so I would appreciate it if we could keep our answers quite brief. My apologies in advance. Let me start with you, Professor Lee. When we look at Japan and South Korea, I guess for many outsiders, they're not accustomed to the fact that there's deep-rooted antagonism, and I think they underestimate it. When we look at the relationship between the two right now, is it as bad as it's ever been?
It's usually been bad over the past 70 years. There are occasional ups and downs, but this year, 2019, bodes ill for the bilateral relationship because it marks the centennial of a landmark movement, independence movement in the Korean Peninsula, the March 1st independence movement. So there will be commemorations, a lot of anti-Japanese sentiment will be invoked, perhaps even together with China, because 2019 also marks the 100th anniversary of the May 4th movement, which was a very powerful nationalistic, essentially anti-Japanese movement in China. So I think we will continue to see sort of a nadir in the bilateral relationship between Seoul and Tokyo in the months to come.
Right. And Peipei Qiu, so there's the issue of sex abuse, sex slavery, the so-called comfort women. There's the issue of these flybys recently by the Japanese and the South Koreans sort of locking their radar on them, the two nations saber-rattling politically over this. When it comes to comfort women, Tokyo saying, we sorted this out in 1965, or we thought we sorted it out in 1965, and then we thought we sorted it out in 2015. Why do you keep on bringing it up? Do they have a point?
Right, that's a very good question. And I think that is also a confusion created by some conservative or ultra-nationalist campaign in the international community, that this issue is not a geopolitical issue. It's not a diplomatic issue. It's a human rights issue. You need to see these war victims. You need to talk to them, to know their pain, to see what is the proper way to resolve it. Now the issue is portrayed as a nation-state relationship issue. Right. However, when the 2015 accord is made, the victims was not even consulted. That's why the critics in Seoul now call to cancel that accord, because these victims' rights, their past suffering has not been correctly acknowledged, and their injury was not compensated. So this is an issue that we need to face seriously.
Right. Lim Tai Wey, should Koreans be allowed to sue Japanese companies in order to get reparations, because a mild, tepid apology is not enough for a lot of these victims?
The Japanese position starts from 1993, when the then Chief Cabinet Secretary, Yohei Kono, made comments about the involvement of Japanese military in procuring services from women in this sector. And so there has been, in that case, there has been acknowledgement of such activities. And in 2015, there was an agreement in which, from their position, is irreversible, that there's an agreement to put the comfort women issue to rest. So from the Japanese perspective, they are sort of trying to cope with the confusion and sort of the uncertainties brought about after the fall of the Park administration and the new Moon administration's ideas about the comfort women issue. So this has restarted again, and unfortunately, it has also been conflated with other events which you have mentioned about the radar locking of the Japanese aircraft and also other issues related to wartime historical memories.
Yes.
So I think there are voices within Japan that perhaps it is necessary to look beyond the wartime memories, to look at very important issues that both countries faces, that both countries have in terms of commonalities. For example, denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula location, and also new geopolitical developments. For example, the rise of India, rise of China,
right. Okay. So
and also
Lim Tai Wey, let me take
uncertainties that are taking place in the region.
Let me take that and pose it to Yoon-Lee. So Professor Lee, we talk of the conflation. We talk of the comfort women issue and the fact that for some there was closure in 2015. For the Moon administration and many others, there was not closure. We have the flybys and we have the little kind of skirmishes and the saber rattling. It's conflated. We have South Korea's foreign minister saying there will be an international forum or conference on sex slavery. That's undoubtedly going to irritate the Japanese, right? And the Japanese saying their own stuff that irritates the South Koreans. Is it all reckless? And maybe are both countries taking their eye off bigger issues such as North Korea's nuclear program, the rise of China, and so on? Would they be better off getting over these things and working together?
This kind of sporadic row between South Korea and Japan is a source of great consternation, exasperation to the United States, because from, as you suggest, a practical utilitarian perspective, the U.S. wants its allies in the region to get along and to be united in taking a united stand against North Korea and China's growing aggression as well. But on the comfort women issue, the December 28th, 2015 agreement was indeed very flawed, because it said this sets the matter to irreversible final resolution. And when it is a matter of crime against humanity, basic human rights violation, you cannot just bury it forever. A state or two states cannot do that, the contracting states. So it only raised the ire of the South Korean people. And the fact is, Japan has never really admitted state culpability, using sophistry to forward the notion that there's no evidence of direct, explicit order, government documents allowing for, calling for coercion, forced recruitment of women. Now, many documents were destroyed when Japan was on the verge of surrender. And I reckon when North Korea, if ever, collapses, I doubt we'll find any documents spelling out that North Korean agents should abduct Japanese civilians, as North Korea has since the 70s. So it's a false argument, and I think this kind of historical dispute will only go on as long as Japan continues to stick to this false position, and as long as fanning the flames of anti-Japanese sentiment is of political utility in South Korea, and it is. That's the sad fact. Whenever you fan the flames of Japanese sentiment, your rating spikes dramatically.
Peipei Qiu, at the heart of all of this, is Japan fundamentally in denial about the atrocities that it committed during its occupation of the Korean Peninsula and during World War II?
The Japanese government have not, gave an official apology. Activists and the survivors, they believe an official apology should be a cabinet approved apology. Right now, Japanese politicians at various occasions, some people made a personal apology, but it's never a cabinet approved apology officially sent to the survivors directly. And on the other hand, the high officials often denies the war atrocities. And right now in Japan, actually, the news media is kind of restricted, put under pressure to mention the comfort woman as forced prostitution or sex slavery. They are changing the wording, using women working in wartime brothels. This is very inappropriate. It's an offense to the survivors who were brought into the comfort stations by force and abused and brutally violated.
Right. Lim Tai Wey, so building on that, is it better for the Americans then, rather than to tell the South Koreans and the Japanese, hey, you're both our allies, we need you guys to get along because we have big issues to deal with? Is it better for the Americans to put pressure on the Japanese to face up to its past and have a proper apology and proper reparations?
I think the U.S. wants its allies to work together well. They have achieved a high level of interoperability in the military sphere and also coordination in the economic sphere. So certainly they want such issues to be resolved peacefully between the two allies. Moreover, as mentioned before, there's so much common issues that all three countries faces. From the Tokyo perspective, Seoul would be extremely useful to communicate its Japanese messages about the status of its kidnapped nationalities and citizens in North Korea. And also, Japan is a useful ally to have when it comes to building a pressure for peaceful Korean Peninsula. After all, the missiles that were tested from North Korea flew over Hokkaido airspace in Japan. So the U.S. and its allies are there, with interoperability, with common aims, and they hope that within the larger picture, the more important issues, both longitudinally as well as in the short-term areas, would sort of supersede the current problems that may be faced from time to time.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned those North Korean missiles going over Hokkaido. When I was given that stage-managed tour of Pyongyang and in the military museum, I guess I expected all the anti-Americanism, but I didn't expect the extent of the anti-Japanese sentiment as well in North Korea. That was fascinating to me, but that's for another time because we're completely out of time. But listen, it's been fascinating delving into this topic with all of you, Yoon-Lee, Peipei Qiu, and Lim Tai Wey. I thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers.